right here, that's the suffering. And that's what do you do with that suffering? Do you become a lemon tree? You're bitter, resentful, angry? Do you become an apple tree? You're generous, you're kind, because you've experienced what suffering is like and you don't want to impose more of that on the world. When you understand this, it's almost difficult to be mad at the person because you understand why. They've experienced the suffering down here, and what they've made of it is something ugly. And yet there can be suffering that can make you create beautiful things out of it. Empathy, why? Because you've suffered. You don't want others to suffer the way that you have. Kindness, sure. Generosity, sure. Not to a fault on any of these, but to a point where you actually make the world a better place. In a sense, maybe a better place to look at, a better tree, prettier tree, brighter personality. But you make the most of it. Any situation that you find yourself in, you optimize it. Avoid the suffering that you can. Engage in all the joy that you can, of course. But man, whatever it is you experience, make it the best possible, so that you're the best possible fruit. This tendency to separate the physical and the mental, as though they're completely separate and distinct, but they belong to one person. In other words, there's a physical part of you, and then there's also this mental part of you. And there is an interplay where they do seem to affect one another. In a formal sense, it's called dualism. The dualism means that there are these two parts of you, physical and mental. You could even think of it as like physical and spiritual, physical and like a soul, physical and mind. In other words, something that's concrete that you can touch, taste, smell, hear, see. And then something else that is not concrete like that. You'll hear it sometimes referred to as the God in the machine. In other words, think of your body as the machine, and then there's something that animates it, whether you call it a soul or a spirit or a mind or a psyche, whatever it is, whatever word you want to use for it. And you can see that these things exist, and we seem to intuitively acknowledge that these things exist. So, for example, if I'm walking down the street, better yet, I'll use the example I used in first period today. I decided to rob a bank. Go into the bank, rob them, come out, and as I come out, the police confront me. I pull a gun, they pull their guns, we start shooting each other. I survive it, but in that process, my right arm is so damaged that I have to amputate. So I go in there to court, and they ask me, how do you plead? And I say, innocent, not guilty, I didn't do it. And people might laugh, and even the judge himself might laugh and go, really? Like, you were on the sidewalk. We picked you up, your wallet was in your back pocket with your ID in it. We ran you through your fingerprints. It's you. There's video of you. Everybody saw that it's you. There's surveillance footage. I'm like, let me see that surveillance footage. So they play it. And I go, that's not me. Quite clearly that's not me. That guy's got two arms. As you can see, I have only one arm. Totally different guy. Do any of us believe that? All right, fine. I lost two arms. Is it still me? Two arms and a leg? Is it still me? At what point do I lose body parts that you finally say, no, that's not Scallon, that's a different person? Oftentimes people will say, it's when you lose your head. Well, why? Because we think of when your head gets cut off, that's the seat of your consciousness. We don't know where your consciousness comes from, but we think of it like when your brain goes, then everything else goes. You're completely unconscious. There's no longer a you. So that tells us something that we all intuitively understand, that this is not you. This is an aspect of you. This is how I recognize you. This is your avatar. But there's something else that's a you, that's deeper than just this physical shell. When we say we like the person, well, using the word person is just short for some other word. Anyone want to guess what that word is?
Personality.
That's the one. Personality. Person is just a short word for personality. So now if I ask you, so what do you mean by what's your personality? Now these are the traits that you start talking about. Person who's intuitive or kind or generous or angry and hostile or bitter or kind, whatever your whole personality is. And if I were to ask you, are you in this room? Are you guys bitter or are you grateful? And the answer to that question is probably, yeah. Yeah. Are you angry or are you happy? Uh-huh. Yeah. Are you self-assured or are you doubtful? Yeah, I suppose so. It really depends on the day you catch somebody. Depends on the day you catch me. It depends on the day you catch anybody. Depends on what they're going through. So does that mean that if today you're happy and then tomorrow when you're angry that that's no longer you? No, of course not. Because this you thing that we talk about, your person, this you, is exactly that. It's these psychological conditions, these psychological traits over time. It's this whole thing that forms the totality of you, and you're being added to every day. So we're talking about you, that's what we mean. That's why if I were to ask you, who are you? However you first answer, that probably tells me what's important to you. But then if I let you talk for a few hours or even a few days, finally you get to the end of it, I go, yep, that's all of you, the whole thing right there. This is a part of it because the physical does affect the mental for sure. But the mental also controls the physical. The body controls the mind and the mind controls the body. It's this circular interaction. So now, when I ask that question, how can you suffer? Can you suffer physically or suffer mentally? And of course the answer is yes. Yes. And when you suffer physically, because the physical affects the mental, then when you suffer physically, you can also suffer mentally. And when you're suffering mentally, you can also suffer physically. So then how is your personality formed? Yes, by both of these things, both of these parts. We make this huge mistake when we try to separate these things out. You are a body, but you're so much more than that as well. You are a mind, but you couldn't exist in this world and experience this world. There would be nothing for your mind to experience except if you lived in this physical world with a physical body. All of it's necessary. It's just like, should you be, should you be a mind, or should you be an intellect, or should you be emotional? Should you be logical, or should you be emotional? Yeah. You need both parts of those. You need both parts of yourself. If you're going to ignore one, then you're ignoring half of what you are and half what you could be. You need the whole thing together. You use your emotions to tell you what you want, and then you use your logic and your mind to tell you how to get it, and to assess whether or not it's the thing that you should want. So when we say that suffering is the substance of life and it's the root of personality, you can think of it like a tree. This is the you right here. The branches and the flowers, whatever comes out of that tree, that's you. You might be an apple tree, pear tree. I think pears come from trees. You might be a lemon tree. Whatever it is that you are. But whatever it is that you are, there's something basic about you, something in your DNA that's you. So if I were to ask you, for example, are you a human being? Yeah, everybody in here is a human being. Everybody who's ever lived is a human. Every human who's ever lived is a human being. All that means is that we have DNA in common. That makes us part of a species. But being a human being is different from being a personality. Not everybody has a personality. Babies in wombs don't have personalities. And people who are on life support connected to machines don't have personalities. So you're different. And so this right here, the you, that's kind of whatever it is that you are, the apple tree, the lemon tree, whatever. And then you've got these roots underneath. And the roots are the things that nourish the tree. And the trunk right here is what kind of filters those experiences to give birth to what comes up out here. In other words, if you have groundwater, whatever nutrients are down here in the soil, if you have terrible nutrients, the trunk can still do some things to try to mitigate that and make the best out of what's coming into it and say, it's the best apple tree possible. You can think of your roots perhaps even as your environment, the people around you, the place where you're growing up. It's what you're taking up out of the soil. And then your trunk is what it is. You can think of the trunk maybe as maybe almost like your mind that's perceiving the world around you, making the best of it or the worst of it, whatever your choice is. And then whatever comes out at the end, when we look at you and we say, this is your personality, that's you. It's what you make out of it. It's what you make out of it. What I mean by that is when you come up, when you look at an environment, let's say you're looking at, like your neighborhood, and you're going to see just a wide variety of people and how they turn out. Everyone being exposed to the same things, the same environment, the same neighborhood, the same people, the same very similar experiences and so forth. But some people turn out to be lemon trees, some people turn out to be apple trees, you understand? And so these roots right here, that's the suffering. And that's what do you do with that suffering? Do you become a lemon tree? You're bitter, resentful, angry? You become an apple tree? You're generous, you're kind, because you've experienced what suffering is like and you don't want to impose more of that on the world. This is why when we see people who are just generally bitter and angry and resentful, when you understand this, it's almost difficult to be mad at the person because you understand why. They've experienced the suffering down here, and what they've made of it is something ugly. And yet there can be suffering that can make you create beautiful things out of it. Empathy, why? Because you've suffered. You don't want others to suffer the way that you have. Kindness, sure. Generosity, sure. Not to a fault on any of these, but to a point where you actually make the world a better place. In a sense, maybe a better place to look at, a better tree, a prettier tree, a better personality. So, suffering is a substance of life. It's part of life, man. And it's the root of personality. It's the thing that forms your personality. Because it's the only thing that makes us persons. But it's this thing right here in the middle, how it is that you perceive it, how it is that you reassemble and put it together. That's what it is that forms this you. Now, the difficult thing is that when you're younger, you don't have control over the suffering, and you don't necessarily have control over the perceptive means either. In other words, when you're 10 years old, when you're 5 years old, you don't really know how to process suffering or abuse unless you have really good models for it. So a lot of times this is work that has to be done later on to figure out, to go back. We looked at with those 3 articles from School of Life, how to go back and process it and make it useful in some way to make you a better person. Because the suffering is going to happen. The joy is going to happen too, by the way. You know, a lot of people are so fixated on the suffering that they miss the joys of life. But if the suffering is going to happen, if the joy is going to happen anyway, you might as well make something out of it. You know? It's like being in a class that you hate. You got to be there anyway. You might as well find some way, something to make it useful. You have a job, and maybe you hate going to your job. You might as well make it useful to you in some way, and not just I get a paycheck at the end. Because no matter how much you get, if you hate your job, you're going to be complaining about how much you get. But you make the most of it. Any situation that you find yourself in, you optimize it. You know, avoid the suffering that you can. Engage in all the joy that you can, of course. But man, whatever it is you experience, make it the best possible, so that you're the best possible fruit. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques? Neat. Happy Wednesday.